In today's video, we're going to teach you how to make the first sounds on your pipes. Stay tuned. Well, hello, I'm Matt Willis Bagpiper, and on this channel I make videos to make you a stronger and more confident piper. If you like this kind of content, please think about giving the video a like, subscribing to the channel, and commenting below with any thoughts you might have. I also teach Skype and online lessons if you want more personalized instruction, but more on that later. In part one of this series, I went over all the supplies you might possibly need to start the journey onto the Highland pipes. Now that you have all of that stuff, how do you put it all to use and start making noise on this glorious instrument of ours? The first thing we need to do before we make any noise is make sure that the bag is airtight. So what you want to do is grab the large stoppers. You're going to need 4 of them, and they're going to go in the stocks, which are the sections that attach to the bag. And you're going to want to stopper up the base, the longest of the stocks, the middle tenor, which is right next to it. There's 3 basically in a row right in the middle, and the outside tenor. Now you want to make sure these stocks are in nice and firm and not possibly popping out. And for right now, we're going to be corking the Chanter stock as well to be testing the bag. The next thing you're going to need to check is the valve at the end of your blowpipe to make sure that this is airtight right here. Now, most pipes are going to come with some sort of flapper valve like the one you see right here. This could be red, it could be white like this one attached to a copper or brass staple of some sort right here. What you want to do is blow through it the wrong way. Yes, put your mouth kind of around the string and blow through it and see if any air comes out. It should be absolutely airtight. Nothing's coming out of that. So this is airtight right here. What if it's not? You're going to want to make sure that it's seated squarely against this and that the back side right here is not curving up and leaking air, or that it's been shoved in so far that maybe the end of it over here is actually sticking out, which can happen if this is either shoved in or if this part is crimped. You might want to carefully bend it straight if it's not. If it is square and it doesn't appear to be leaking, you can carefully lift it up and actually look at the surface of the blowpipe itself. Is this rough? Is this not completely smooth? Every once in a while, the end of the blowpipe itself is just a little too porous to make an airtight seal, and you'll probably need to smooth that off. That's beyond the scope of this video. You shouldn't hopefully be having that problem. If it is, you're going to need to remove the string and the valve and very carefully with a sanding block, sand that down smooth. And you'll want sandpaper that's pretty smooth, 600 grit and finer, to get it nice and smooth, almost like a mirror on the end, but again, against a sanding block. Don't just use your hand. It's got to be completely flat. But you'll have to then go boom to the video up there, or the one linked in the description below, on how to restring the entire joint. I really hope it doesn't come to this for you, but if this is leaking, you're not going to have any success trying to inflate your bagpipes and make sure they're airtight. This instrument's hard enough without an air leak. I, on the other hand, tend to use a moose valve, which you can see right here. This actually lives inside the blowpipe stock. So again, that's the piece that the blowpipe attaches to. It's between the 3 for the drones and the end nose bit for the Chanter. There is a tool to install this. If you want to learn more about the moose valve, up there in the description below, video all about this. It's a great valve, not needed right now, however, if you have a flapper on yours. In fact, you don't want both a moose valve and a flapper. It's not needed to have 2. So I have my moose valve in, and I have all 3 drone stocks corked. I have the Chanter stock corked, and then the final thing you're going to want to check is if you have a zipper on your bag, make sure that it is zipped up all the way so that you're not leaking any air out of there. Be it a moose valve, flapper valve, get your blowpipe into the blowpipe stock and inflate the bag. You might even need to put your hand around your mouth to make sure you're getting a nice tight seal. And then, even though this should be completely tight, I'd recommend just putting your thumb over the end of the blowpipe to make sure it's not leaking any air out of the end of the blowpipe. Now, how long should it be airtight? Well, there's a lot of different schools of thought. Some people say a minute, some people say 30 seconds, some people say 5 minutes. For me, if it's airtight for 12 to 15 seconds, and when I mean airtight, I can get no additional air into the bag. Like that, I could blow no additional air into this bag whatsoever, even after that was 20 or 25 seconds. But even if it's 15 seconds, that's longer than any cycle of blowing and squeezing you're going to be applying to the bag. So if it's airtight during that duration, it's going to be airtight for any perceivable amount of time you're actually commanding the instrument. Now, if your instructor says otherwise, please go with their instructions. If they want a minute, 5 minutes, whatever it is, please listen to them. They understand your situation better than I do. But if you were one of my students or you're just watching these videos, I think a 15-second airtight bag is fine. But not 15 seconds and you blow a little like into it. That's no. At 15 seconds, it's got to be completely airtight, not able to blow in any additional air. I could barely get any more air in right then. And that's been probably, well, about a minute now. If your bag is leaking and not holding air, can you hear? Put your ear to the various stocks and take a listen. Can you hear any air coming out of the bag? But that's not likely. If you hear air coming out of the bag, it's probably a very leaky bag. If you have a cowhide, goat skin, or otherwise some sort of animal skin bag, and it's leaking, it may well need additional seasoning. For information on seasoning, again, video up here, link in the description for how you can go about seasoning your bag to make sure that it is airtight. With a synthetic bag, a Bannatyne, a Canmore, a Red Ross bag, there's now the Mar bags on the market. There's a lot of synthetic bags out there. If your synthetic bag is leaking, there is no need for seasoning. That would just ruin the bag. If you do have a synthetic bag and it's leaking, I would make sure that any moisture control systems you have inside are removed, any valves are removed, so it's just the bag and the stocks. Keep everything corked, and I would maybe put in just like, I don't know, not quite a quarter cup of water, and then zip it all up, make sure it's all corked, blow it up, and see if you can see bubbles coming out of anywhere. If it's concentrated at one leak somewhere on the actual cloth of the bag, that's not great. I would contact your retailer, your reseller, wherever you got the bag manufacturer. It might be a faulty bag. I've never found any sort of patch repair kit that lasts more than a couple of days, so you really need to get the bag replaced if it's leaking there. If it's leaking from any of the grommets, and you'll see a photo right over here, if it's leaking from these, make sure that the stocks have been fully seated. You want the groove around the bottom to be seated basically flush with the inside of the bag. Every once in a while, they're not popped through quite enough, and it's not making an airtight seal around there. But without an airtight bag, this process is going to be extremely hard, so it's very important that we start with an airtight bag. Now, assuming your bag is airtight, the next thing we need to do is make sure that the chanter can fit well into the chanter stock. I'm going to go ahead and take out that large stopper that was in the chanter stock. I'm going to take my pipe chanter, and again, this is not your practice chanter. Totally different instrument. I have a reed in this one right now. I'm actually going to take that out for the time being as we're testing the fitting of this chanter, so I'm not possibly damaging the reed. And when dealing with a chanter, especially a Blackwood chanter, but it's a good call for any chanter, put your hand right around the bulb. That's the area right underneath the string. This is the part where you want to be holding the chanter from, and really the thumb and forefinger around the top. These are quite thin and you don't want them to break. And it needs to be in this stock fairly firmly. So you don't want to be grabbing it from down here and twisting. It'll crack the chanter right in half, and you don't want that. Even with a plastic chanter, while not likely to break, it could warp the neck, the throat, the area up at the top. So just get used to holding your chanter near the top when you're needing to make any adjustments or remove or install it into your pipes. So now let's check the fitting here and see how snug it may or may not be. Now that's pretty good right there. I'm pretty happy with that. With one hand, I can twist the chanter, and notice I'm doing it here, but it does not readily want to come out. It's taking both hands and a little bit of twisting. Remember, this part of the instrument is fighting gravity. It's going to be pointed down, so if this is too loose, it's going to shoot out. So it needs to be in there firmly enough that it's not about to pop out with the pressure we're going to be applying. But it also shouldn't be in there so snugly that you can't possibly get it in or out with possibly damaging the chanter. So this is very much a Goldilocks situation of it needing to be just right. If it's too loose, you're going to need to have some sort of string. I have some waxed yellow hemp, one of the things that was on that list, and you could go ahead and add a little bit of string to the chanter. So you can see here, I actually have a couple of different strings on there. I've made adjustments over the years. You might want to start with just as little as perhaps that. You can see the yellow on there. That right there, if it was loose, that might be enough. But don't cut it off of the roll yet. Put that in, test fit it again. If it's still loose, you can go ahead and put another wrap or two around it. But notice I'm going kind of nice and wide. We're not trying to like in rows down it. That's an awful lot of string. It'll make it almost certainly too tight. When you have a nice fitting, you can go ahead and take a small pair of scissors or a knife and cut the string. The waxed hemp tends to stick to the thread that's already on there. If it's not sticking to it and you find that it's just pushing down, make sure that you're really putting it in there quite firmly. I'm putting some tension on this as I'm wrapping it around to make sure it almost kind of cuts into the string. But even then, sometimes it'll just slide to the bottom. Should that happen, you may well need to like tie a little half hitch. And when you're done, you might want to actually just put the thread right above the string, between the chanter and the string here, so that when you go to put it in, it doesn't just all slide to the bottom. That little ledge of the edge of the string might hold it in place. But what if it's too tight? If it's too tight, you're gonna wanna take your fingernail. This tends to work most of the time, not all the time, but much of the time I can find the end of the string that was on there just by kind of roughing it up with my fingernail. Found the edge of the string right there. And I can remove just a little bit of string. You can see right there, here was some string. There we go. There was some string that was on here previously. Now, with that string removed, it may well fit. Try not to have to cut it off if you can at all. Avoid it, because if you cut the wrong bit of string, you might unravel more of this than you think. And while that's not the end of the world, you're going to have to apply a lot more of the string, the hemp, on it to make the fitting be the tension it needs to be. So now that I've removed a little bit of string, I'm going to test fit it again. And it's a little loose now. So now you can see the yellow I have on there. That's a guess right there. Let's see, was I right? Big bucks, no whammies? Little tight, little too much. So I'm going to take some of the string I just put on and take it off. To find the end of the string, it already kind of stuck to it quite well, as you can see here. There we go. A little less string. How's it fitting now? Again, my hand right around the top. Good. Fits well. We're almost ready to make noise on the bag, but first we're going to make a little noise with our face and the chanter by itself. Now let's see how this chanter reed here is doing. So again, this is a different reed than the one for your practice chanter. In most all situations, they are cane, like this one right here, and it lives just like before in the top of the chanter. But before we blow it, I actually want to give it just a little bit of moisture. It's likely quite dry. And we're going to kind of test the strength and make sure that you can command your chanter by itself before we stick it into the bag. So quickly, I'm just going to actually go on my tongue, get a little bit of moisture on it, and then I'm going to grab the reed just above the wrapping on this reed. It's blue. I'm going to grab it right above that, and I'm going to squeeze that together right above the wrapping just until the lips of the reed come together. It doesn't take that much pressure. And I'm going to do this, I don't know, 10 to 15 times. This is kind of warming the reed up, easing it in just a little bit. This reed is likely going to be harder than you expect. And then when I go to put it in the top, put it in, should be in there firmly enough that it can hold the chanter up. Now I'm got my hand ready to catch it in case it didn't, but you want to make sure it's not leaking any air down in here. Now before mouth testing this, I strongly recommend some earplugs. This is going to be loud. Try to play an E and see if you can get it out. If all you hear is leaking air, you need to approach it with far more velocity. You really kind of think about punching the air through that reed with a lot of pressure and effort. If when you go to blow, no matter how hard you try, you can't get any sound out, you're likely going to need to ease the reed up more than the little bit we just did now. There is a playlist up here, again in the description below, about techniques that you can use to get your chanter reed to a more reasonable strength. This would be a 3-hour video if I went through all of it here, so hopefully your chanter reed is an appropriate strength. If not, check that out. You should be able to hold that sound for 4 or 5 seconds or longer. Longer would be great, but 4 to 5 seconds on E. If you can do that, then you're ready to stick this in the bag. If you can only get like little wisps of an E coming out, that means you still need to ease in the reed. I'd probably try to maybe squeeze it a couple more times, maybe another 10 to 15 squeezes on the reed. Again, just till the blades of the reed come together. Try that 3 or 4 times. If after that you still can only get tiny little bits of an E coming out, and a lot of breath, and you're seeing stars in your eyes and everything else, again, check out that playlist to ease in the reed even more, because it's just simply too hard for you to play right now. Sticking it in the bag when you can't play it by mouth is just a recipe for disaster, and you're not going to have any success. But assuming you can do that, it's time to get this chanter reed in this chanter stock. Now, when we put it in, again, I'm holding the chanter by the bulb at the top, and we want to go straight in, and we don't want to chip the edges of this reed if we can help it at all. Straight in. I see a lot of beginners want to kind of make a turn. Don't do that. Go straight into the tunnel. I got plenty of light here. Don't have too much coffee. And it's in. If you hear a that's not good. Do your best to really drive it as straight in as you can, and it should be seated all the way in the stock, as you can see right here. Now, the chanter is likely not going to be facing the right direction, so from the nose of the bag, the front of it, you can kind of align the holes down that, but it's still probably going to need to be twisted. Again, to twist the chanter, you do it from the bulb. You don't twist from down here. Always at the bulb whenever we're dealing with our chanter. You need to make sure the holes are under your fingers when you go to play this. Now that we have the reeded chanter safely installed in the pipes, it's time to make some sound. The first time we do this, I just want you to try to make some sound with the force of your breath pressure alone. You're going to need to squeeze the bag to some degree to hold it in place, but for this very first step, while we try to make this kind of squawk out at us, I want to see if we can do it with just our lung engagement. That'll change shortly, but that's where we're starting. Now, I wasn't squeezing with any particular force, and you could see that even when I stopped blowing in, the chanter kept going for just a second. The bag itself had enough elasticity from being pushed out with that much breath pressure that it was kind of coming in, and it let the reed keep speaking for just a minute. I like to do all of these early exercises on E because I find E is the strength you kind of need to think about blowing the entire instrument. It's more than I want to get into right now, but ultimately we need to be playing the pipes at one constant pressure. We don't want to be altering our pressure with the high notes seeming like they take more air and the bottom hand taking less air. From your perceived exertion while playing, it's going to seem that the bottom hand is easier, but if you're playing it correctly, that's actually not true. So for now, we're going to just play an E, try to get a big full sound on the E as best we can. But how can we do that without our arm? Well, we can't. Now it's time to get the real engine, the real star of the show here, your left arm, engaged. It could be your right arm, but it's almost certainly your left arm. So when we're playing the pipes, your squeezing arm, regardless of which one it is always engaged while we're playing. That's right, even when you see a piper's arm going up while they're blowing into the bag, it's not because they're lifting their arm and making it easier to inflate. They're just lessening the squeeze they're applying to the bag so that when you see the arm raise, it's because the force of the breath going in is greater than the amount of force being supplied by the arm. And then when you go to inhale, then this is going to have to take over the whole show for a little bit. So obviously that's firmer engagement yet still. But the arm is always engaged. The biggest problem I see beginners having is that they blow into the bag and they loosen their arm almost entirely, thinking they're going to command it with their air. Your air is the fuel. This is the engine. This is the motor commanding everything, and the air is the fuel that lets this do the driving. To focus on our arm for a little bit, now I want you to inflate it until it makes noise with your mouth, and then I want you to start squeezing as hard as you need to and see how long you can make that chanter reed continue to sound while just squeezing and not blowing at all. I'll demonstrate. You don't have to take your mouth off the blowpipe the way I just did. I just want you to see that I was not able to provide any more air to this system right here, to the reed, and that was all the squeeze. That's the kind of engagement you need. Most beginners find that they can only go maybe 1 to 2 seconds, if that, when they start, and that's fine. It's a very physical instrument. It's going to take time to develop these squeezing muscles. It's like putting someone in a headlock, and we don't tend to do that a lot, so it's going to take a while to build this all up. So ultimately, when we're playing the pipes and trying to get a good, steady sound, it's about the balancing act of, while inflating the bag, providing enough support with our arm that everything stays stable and strong, And then as we taper our air off and go to take a breath in to refuel ourselves, that we transition to a firmer squeeze on the arm so that the air can keep coming out at the same velocity it was when we were blowing in. Then when we go to reinflate, now that we've refueled ourselves, we have a big tank full of air, you go get that air back into the bag, and that you want to ramp it up so that you can de-escalate your arm at the same rate and let the air continue to go through at something as close to an even flow as possible. I like to imagine maybe water going over the spillway of a dam or something like that, maybe instead of air. Water can be a little easier to think about. That as that water is going over, whether it's being powered by our squeeze alone or by the squeeze and our breath, that you shouldn't see it start to trickle off because you've backed off too much. It should be the same the entire time. If your chanter stops when you're transitioning either to reinflating it or breathing in yourself and it stops, that means at some point your arm was not engaged to the degree it needed to be to keep the air going through. Enough talking out of the way. Let's go ahead, fire this thing up again, see if we can hold that E, and if you could hold that E for 20 or 30 seconds, that'd be amazing. Again, you're going to be engaging your arm the entire time with more force than you might think while blowing in, and even more force yet still while you're breathing in and refilling your own air tank. Also to note, when you put the bag under your arm, try to have this stock touching your chest if at all possible. We squeeze kind of the middle section of the bag more than the back of the bag, and the closer this base drone stock, the longest one, is to you, the more upright the drones are going to be. Now, we don't want them so upright they're going to fall forward eventually, but we don't want them so far back that they're like laying relatively flat. We want a nice, fairly upright stance with our drones, and even while we have this goose set up here without the drones attached, we can still try to get those stocks close to the body. So there's a little bit of the blowing and squeezing. And what is the rate it should be? Well, ultimately, it depends on your own level of fitness, wellness, health, all of that. But something around the cadence of how a pipe band sounds when they're starting. With the being while you're inflating and the pause being when you're breathing in. Something in and around that, but to be honest, it's not that important that you have a strict meter you're following, because ultimately you're providing the air and the pressure with your arm that is needed for the chanter and ultimately the drones, when those involved in this whole wonderful disaster, that they need to do their job. And maybe you inflated it a little less this time than the time before, which means you're not going to be able to go as long before you have to recycle everything. So it's not important to get on like a hard, fast cadence. That said, you don't want to be powering it with just your breath. I see some players do this. This is an example of what not to do. You can see there, I was taking almost no time for the inhales, and I was really just powering the whole thing with my breath alone. That tends to be an indicator that you have not engaged your arm to the degree it needs to be engaged on the bag to make sure that you're powering it with your arm and providing your arm and the reeds with the fuel, the air that is required. But again, you're driving this with your arm. So when the pipes are set up in this arrangement, it's called a goose. We're going to worry about the drones here very soon, but not quite yet. I wouldn't worry about trying to add the drones, even if they're corked. I would just keep it in this basic goose setup until you can keep a tone coming out of your chanter without a choke, a small little break in the sound, until you can do that for, I don't know, a minute. 2 minutes would be even better. But a typical pipe tune at the tempos you're likely playing, it is about a minute to a minute and a half. And it'd be nice to be able to get through a whole tune without the chanter cutting out. You can also hold notes other than E. I've just been doing E today. You're welcome to do slow, basic scales. I mean, you're welcome to even try to play tunes, but you might find very quickly that it's frustrating that you're not able to get the gracings, the embellishments, the things you know how to do might not come out on this. And that's because we really need to be focusing right now on making sure that we can command this instrument before we get all of the fun stuff that we learned on the practice chanter involved. A great exercise you can do is to start on an E and then go to a low G. Then go back up to an E and hold each note for 3, 5, 10 seconds, a good little bit of time, so that you're not thinking about the fingering, you're thinking about the tone that it's making. And when you go from a low hand note back up to an E, if you choke, when you go to the E it doesn't come out, it means that you backed off your pressure too much on the low hand, because ultimately on a woodwind, the low notes will speak at a lower overall pressure than the higher notes. But again, on the pipes, we need every note being able to sound at the same pressure, which means we overblow the bottom hand notes to some degree by design. So if the bottom hand feels really easy compared to the top hand, well, you're not wrong. It just means you're not applying the needed force to the bottom hand. We're also not worrying about tuning at this point. That is way beyond anything we need to worry about. Just play your chanter with the reed. Some of the notes might sound a bit out. We'll worry about that in the future. For now, it's about learning how to command the chanter and the bag as a goose before we worry about complicating this further. So next time we'll talk about how to put the rest of the instrument together, because we still actually haven't discussed that, but right now it's not important. I know you wanted to make some sound on your pipes, and with any luck, you've been able to do so. So next time we'll assemble the drones. They're still going to be corked, but they'll at least be on the shoulder, and we're going to make sure that everything is positioned properly before we actually start worrying about getting those up and going. So again, try to get that chanter sounding for around a minute, if not 2, before worrying about moving on to anything else. Well, thank you so much for watching, everybody. If you got something out of this video, please think about giving it a like, subscribing to the channel, and commenting below with any thoughts you might have. I also have a Patreon where as little as $1 a month goes a long way to helping to support the channel. You'll see names now of folks scrolling up, and a special shout out to Ms. Carrie Tresek and Mr. Michael Dingus, my #1 supporters, but you often get early access to videos and other perks, so go check out the Patreon. I also teach Skype and online lessons. Go ahead and head over to www.commandyourbagpipe.com or email me at the address you see down here, and we'll get you going. I'm working with folks from all over the planet, and I hope to work with you soon. I also have a line of Command Your Bagpipe merchandise and the new prescription bagpipe merchandise like this mug right here. But I also have t-shirts and hats and hoodies and other things, so go let the world know that you command your bagpipe. Thank you for watching, and again, I'm Matt Willis. Cheers.